The first lesson is found in Daniel chapter 4, verses 28 through 37. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. He was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king said, "Is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power for my glorious majesty?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came down from heaven. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom is taken from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will." Immediately the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society. He ate grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of the heaven, until his hair grew as long as eagle feathers, and his nails became like birds' claws. When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason was returned to me. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever, for his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my lords sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol the honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth and his ways are justice. He is able to bring low those who walk in pride.
Grace and peace to you from God, who never stops interrupting pride with mercy and comfort and truth. Let us pray. God of mercy and justice, lift our eyes beyond ourselves and soften our hearts toward our neighbors. Where pride blinds us, bring truth. Where fear holds us back, bring courage. Speak to us now and lead us in your way. Amen. How many of you have done stupid things when you're in love? No, wait, do not raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Quite honestly, if you didn't immediately want to raise your hand, congratulations. You were either lying or you're still doing them. When Gwen and I first started dating, she lived down in central Illinois and I lived up here. How we got together is a long story that I know I've shared with some of you, but it has no bearing on what I'm sharing today, so I'll just give you the Hallmark version. We met when we were 15, lost touch for 30 years, reconnected on the Book of Faces, fell in love, got married. Now we're back to stupid things. One weekend when I was down visiting her, we were out in her backyard relaxing after shoveling what seemed to be 50 metric tons of horse poop out of the barn. And for the record, horses produce a lot of waste. They do. There are EPA regulations for less than what we took out of that barn. Anyway, Gwen we were out there relaxing. Gwen went back to the house to refresh our cocktails. And then when I was sitting there patiently waiting for her to come back in, that is when I saw it. To my right from the porch was a giant tree that reminded me of the tree that was in my backyard that I used to climb when I was a kid. And I don't know why it reminded me of this, but my brain doesn't work like other brains. Its inner workings are a mystery, but I'm telling you this, and you already know it because you listen to me every week. So I saw that tree, and I thought, I should climb that tree and surprise Gwen when she comes out. Why? Because you do stupid things when you're in love, right? So hastily, I scurried up this tree, and I scurried over the tree. I sized it up. And looking at it, I knew I could get up there pretty easily. It had some branches, I could swing my leg, pull myself up there. It had some leverage, I could do it. Now, please keep in mind that I had not climbed a tree in nearly 30 years at that point in my life. But evidently, it is much like riding a bike, because no time at all, I was up in that tree, and I was waiting for her to come out with heightened anticipation. Turns out muscle memory remembers, but joints hold a grudge. I'm not going to get into that. When she finally came out, 2 drinks in her hands, one for each of us. I just want to clarify. She looked a bit confused, scanning the environment to see where I was, and then I yelled, "I'm up here!" And she yelled back, "Great! How are you going to get down? I had not thought about that. Getting up there was the easy part. Getting back down was something that was going to be a little more daunting. There were no real low-hanging branches for descending. So I just yelled, I'll just jump down. She pleaded with me to wait for her to get a ladder, but my ego would have no part of that. I mean, I used to jump from trees all the time when I was a kid. I got this. So she started to walk over to me. I got to the lowest part of the tree that I could, sized it up, and did my best $6 million man jump. If you remember the show, it was like, in my imagination, it was going to be slow. What it turned out to be was gravity with an attitude. As soon as I leaped off that branch, I second guessed my decision. In my mind, I was still 10 and limber. In my mind, this is going to be easy. In my mind, the ground was much closer to me than it appeared. Again, I was wrong. Perhaps when I was younger and much lighter, the atmosphere helped me float down to earth when I jumped from a tree. Because when I hit the ground as a middle-aged man, I hit hard. My feet hit the ground, my knees buckled instantly. Then I plunged into the dirt face first, knocking the wind completely out of me. My lovely bride, not bride then, but Gwen rushed over to me to make sure I was okay. And once seeing I was okay, said, "You didn't think that out very well, did you?" No, I had not. Getting back down seemed so easy in my head from where I stood on that branch. And I have not climbed a tree since. But in my defense, height changes perspective, doesn't it? In this story I just shared you, from my perspective, everything looked manageable until gravity voted no. But height, that perspective changes all aspects of our life. It gives us a different view. From high enough up, traffic looks orderly. From high enough up, people blur together. From high enough up, neighborhoods don't even seem to exist. Height has a way of convincing us that everything below us is manageable. It's distant, maybe even insignificant. In our reading today, King Nebuchadnezzar stands on the roof of his palace. Stone beneath his feet, empire before his eyes. Babylon stretches out as far as the eye can see. There are towers, there are walls, there are markets, there are temples. It is power organized into architecture. From where he stood, he was far above the ground, although his fall was going to be a little more harsh than mine. But from there, he speaks out loud what empire always whispers to itself. It says, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" There was no PowerPoint. There was no ribbon cutting. This was pure ego with a view. In this story, it's not rage that undoes him. It's not cruelty in the moment. It's confidence without accountability, which, to be fair, has never gone wrong in human existence, right? And before the echo of his own voice fades, heaven intervenes because God knows something we often forget. What looks like stability from the top can be devastation at ground level. And this week we continue our sermon series, Standing Firm in a Shifting World, in Daniel chapter 4. And this is often read as a morality tale about arrogance. And it is. It absolutely is. But it's so much more than that. This isn't just about a man that has an ego problem. This is a story about how systems rot. How systems rot when power stops listening. Babylon didn't rise because the king worked hard. Babylon rose because people were conquered, people were displaced, they were enslaved, people were silenced. Its beauty was subsidized by suffering. And from the height of the balcony, none of that is visible. Nebuchadnezzar's pride is dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it's normal. He's come to believe that success proves righteousness, that dominance signals blessing, that outcomes excuse methods. Like I said last week, so many themes in this book parallel what we look at and what we see every day in our own world. Then over in our gospel reading, Jesus exposes the same danger in the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee's prayer, it's not hostile, it's confident, it's calm, it's polite. He thanks God, he follows the rules, he does everything right. But if we listen to his prayer carefully, his prayer requires a comparison. His righteousness needs a foil. Somebody else has to feel worse for him to feel secure. He's biblically saying, God, I just want to thank you how awesome and amazing we both are. Nearby is the tax collector, already isolated, labeled as a sinner by society, already pushed to the margins. He doesn't argue his case. He doesn't ask to be admired. He simply asks to be spared. What we hear in both of these stories is a theme that pierces all of humanity, that pride always justifies inequality. It tells us who deserves more and who deserves less. When we stop and look, we see that our world, we have perfected Babylon. We call it growth, we call it efficiency, we call it progress, we might even call it safety, but too often we measure success without asking who's exhausted, who's excluded, or who might have been erased along the way. We might look down from our perch and see people who work full time and still can't survive. And this isn't just relegated to the conversations we have about what minimum wage should be. It is much more pervasive than that. I remember before my youngest daughter was born, I was a first-class petty officer in the Navy, which isn't too high, which isn't too low. But for what I made on income with 3 kids, I was eligible for WIC and food stamps. And I wasn't willy-nilly with my salary. I was fairly thrifty. But if it hadn't been for that assistance with 3 small kids, I don't know how we would have made it. I honestly don't. But other people from their height, their perch, might have seen something different. We might look down from our perch and see neighbors where, opportunity or who can stay or who can go is dependent on zip code, political affiliation, or maybe even the color of our skin. From where we're perched here in Wisconsin, we don't always see the realities of what's happening on the ground in other cities around the country. Or we might look down and see systems that benefit some while burdening others. And we call it just, that's the way things are. And make no mistake, this also invades the church. We talk about unity without reckoning with inequity. We preach love without dismantling harm or addressing harm. We prefer charity because it feels less messy than politics, less messy than, less costly anyway. And I'm guilty of this. I would much rather cook a meal for the outreach center than march in a protest. I am not a marcher. I'm just being transparent. I am very brave when there's a casserole involved. And like the Pharisee, we might reassure ourselves, at least we're better than someone. Like Nebuchadnezzar, we admire all that we've built and maybe avoid asking who's paid the price. A shifting world doesn't create injustice. A shifting world reveals injustice. And that is all true, but it's not the end, because if we listen, the gospel breaks in not gently, but mercifully disruptive. In our reading, the king is haughty. He looks from his perch and feels proud of all that he's done, how beautiful the city is, but even with all that he has done and in his boastfulness, God does not strike him dead. No, God instead just removes him from power. The king is faced to live without control, without command, without applause. He experiences real vulnerability. The very king his empire inflicted on others. Our reading says, he was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claw of a bird. I don't know about you, that sounds pretty gnarly to me. Sounds pretty gnarly. At least his skin stayed moist, right? Small mercies. No, and amid this, and this is critical, God restores him. Not when he apologizes publicly, not when he reforms policy, but when he finally looks up instead of out. I bless the Most High, Nebuchadnezzar says. Not my power, not my greatness, but God's. I want to give this personal opinion on Nebuchadnezzar. He fell into the traps many leaders fall into. He had so much success that he viewed himself as infallible, that he could do anything, that he believed his own hype. But unlike other leaders who are so assured of their rightness that they never changed their minds, he did. Our storyline is riddled time after time where he realizes he was wrong and acknowledges that God knows more. But this time, instead of just acknowledging that God was great, he actually submitted to God's greatness. And when we swap over to our gospel, we find Jesus confirming the same pattern, that the one who leaves justified is the one who tells the truth the truth about himself and trust God to do what he cannot. I mean, this is real grace. Grace that doesn't flatter, grace that doesn't excuse, grace that stores humanity by dismantling illusion. In our own Lutheran terms, this is the law doing its killing work, exposing pride, false security, self-justification, so that the gospel can rise us to new life. God humbles not to crush, but to heal. God unmasks not to shame, but to save. And here's the turn. If humility restores vision, then justice becomes unavoidable. A humble church sees what it once ignored. A humble church hears voices it once dismissed. A humble church stops asking, how do we protect ourselves? And starts asking, who is being harmed? Standing firm in a shifting world doesn't mean defending comfort. It means risking compassion. It means confessing where we benefit from broken systems, repenting without rushing to self-defense, which is hard in today's polarized world. It means moving beyond charity towards structural care, standing with, not over, those who suffer. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming faithful. The God who humbled a king still brings truth to power. The God who justified a sinner still listens to cries from the margins, listens to cries from cities from Los Angeles, El Paso, Washington, D.C., and right here in Kenosha, all over this land. The gospel doesn't ask us to shrink. The gospel asks us to kneel, which thankfully is safer than jumping from a tree. Because when we kneel before God, we strip ourselves about who's right, who's wrong, who's on this side, who's on that side. When we kneel before God, we can finally stand with our neighbors. When we lift our eyes, not to what we built, but to who God is, we discover that humility is not weakness. We're going to wrap this up all together here. Nebuchadnezzar had to come down off a roof. The Pharisee needed to stop looking around. The tax collector dared to look up. And that, siblings, is still the journey of faith. Faith calls us to come down from pride, from certainty, from comfort. Faith calls us to look up to the God whose mercy is greater than our own mistakes. And faith calls us to stand with those who the world overlooks, the world excludes, or even the world ignores. To come down, look up, stand with. That is how a church lives faithfully. That is how justice takes roots. That is how we as Christians stand firm in a shifting world. Amen.